Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, Getting Started with Access Management, How to Standardize Roles and Access Across Your Organization, brought to you by strongDM. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Justin McCarthy, CTO. Justin originally developed empathy for operations as a founding and pager-carrying member of many operations and data teams. As an executive, he has led engineering and product in high throughput and high stakes e-commerce, financial, and AI products. Justin is the original author of strongDM's core protocol-aware proxy technology. And with that, let's get started.
All right, hello, my name is Justin, as Dominic said, and today what we're going to be going through is our approach to role and access discovery. So that is the process of talking through within your organization and across your organization, the needs and the use cases that your various teams and team members have, specifically those needs with respect to accessing infrastructure. The process does apply to any kind of access, but because we are the infrastructure access platform, we're going to focus on a lot of those cases that deal with accessing data directly, accessing systems directly. We're also going to go through the formalization of that process that we've built into a spreadsheet that you'll be able to pick up and use yourself. And actually, that's a spreadsheet that we maintain and version. And so anytime you have questions with it, we'll always be here to help out and offer suggestions on how you could best conduct a discovery campaign like this within your organization. There'll be time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so the strongDM Infrastructure Access Platform. Our product authenticates, authorizes, connects, and observes all of your infrastructure access. So again, that's the lens that we're using as you think about your role and access discovery campaign. Generally, on a day-to-day basis, we're working with customers to discover what types of servers, what types of data sets, what types of clusters their various teams need to do their job on a daily basis. We're going to start out with a concrete example of just that. So in this case, you have a new team member. So we see John here. We see that he's from the marketing department. We can kind of look at him. Looks like he's got some glasses. Looks like he's got maybe a beard there. Based on just this profile here, we now have to decide whether we should give John access to the production customer database. Very few clues on whether we should do this or not. So now we don't have a way of tabulating this. So just all in our minds, we're now going to contemplate and choose our own adventure here, whether we're going to give John access, we're going to deny him access, we're going to follow an existing approval process, or maybe we'll do all the above. And this synthetic example is something that administrators encounter every day associated with either approving or denying access to systems. We all need access to do our jobs, but in many ways, the more sensitive the systems we need access, in some ways, the more we need access to it. And so being explicit and deliberate about your access control and being really intentional and thorough with your discovery of access is exactly what we're going to talk about throughout this talk. And so that's going to give you, hopefully, the basis for a rational answer to whether we're going to ultimately give John access or deny access. To say it another way, does John in this particular role in marketing need access to the system? And so through the worksheet that we have and through the steps that we've outlined, you will be able to, for a substantial portion of your infrastructure and your sensitive systems, you'll be able to answer these questions. So I think the reasons why this can be challenging should be fairly obvious, but just to touch on a few of them, there are very few organizations that come into existence with all of the departments formed, all of the systems established. There's no organization ever goes from a green field to a fully built city in the snap of a finger, and therefore everything has grown organically. And that means that systems have grown organically, departments have grown organically, habits and culture has grown organically, and there's rarely a forcing function for going back and redesigning and asking, is there a compelling reason why a software engineer might need access to this particular financial report, for example. So this is an occasion, and this is a system for essentially asking your organization about these use cases that allows you to maybe establish a new baseline that you can then apply throughout the organization. Final note on tooling. This final bullet point: what tool solves this problem? Although at strongDM we build a product that is concerned with granting access, in terms of discovering the shape of roles in your organization, it's mostly conversation. So it's mostly human discovery process, and that's why we really want to encourage folks to think about their overall project plan for talking to their organization and collecting these inputs. So here we go. We are going to jump in to the worksheet. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got a list of steps that, and again, after this talk, you'll receive a link to this sheet. This is actually an outline of a project plan for conducting access discovery. So the first step that we're going to conduct in this access discovery is actually one that takes the longest amount of time, and that's why we want to get it started first. So this is soliciting test cases from your organization. So we've actually developed a form, and let me just pop it up. A form that should be very easy for everyone in your organization to fill out. Basically just to collect examples of a type of access in order to perform a type of task. You don't need to necessarily guide toward completeness for this. The point is to get started and collect as many of these test cases as you can over time. And you'll see how we're going to use that in a few minutes. So once you get that solicitation for test cases broadcast out to the organization, those cases are going to start to fill in. And that's when you can move on to the second step, which is to gather an hopefully exhaustive list of who might be granted access to something. So this is the who list. So there are a couple of obvious sources for this. You might have an HRIS in place. You might have an email system. You might have an existing Active Directory or SSO. Actually, any and all of those are great sources for your who list. So I'll just give an example over here. So you might end up with a list that looks a lot like this. So you're going to have essentially an inventory of potential users. Hopefully you can get something like a business title. Hopefully you can get something like a department. Maybe you might even be able to get resolution all the way down to a team level. It doesn't particularly matter if this grid of titles and departments and names is perfect. The point is to get it as big as you can, because later we're going to try and match as many as possible of these folks to some of the roles that we discover. Okay, so after we've built our who list, the next step is the what list. So the what list is going to be every type of resource that ultimately we will want to grant access to via a role. So a great source for what's might be, for example, a listing of SaaS applications. So your IT team, your HR team. They're going to have a list of some of the vendors that are commonly accessed. Here at strongDM, because we focus on infrastructure, most of the campaigns we're going through with customers are dealing more are more focused on the infrastructure side. So that ends up being databases, servers, data lakes, applications, clusters, generally those resources that technical staff need access to. Okay. In those cases, inventories of those systems are thankfully very often available using APIs or using state from some of the automation systems, such as configuration management or a provisioning tool like Terraform or Puppet or Chef. So any of those sources would together feed into your what list. And I'll just give you an example of a what list right now. So you can see here, we've got some system names. In this particular case, we've got a concept of an environment. We have a concept of geography. A little bit of categorization can be helpful. And then this actually ends up being a very important notion. It's not always possible to assign a sensitivity level. And there's obviously a lot of potential precision you could add in here. But we generally find, just as a starting point, talking about low, medium, or high sensitivity is sufficient. And then really just reflecting on all of the potential types of access, all the potential types of resources, and just thinking about what resources have that really high sensitivity. That's going to inform a lot of your ultimate role attribution and role assignment decisions. Okay, so we've got our list of who, we've got our list of what. To make both of those useful, easy to understand in terms of granting access from the what list to the who list, we find that it's actually quite useful to talk about two levels of aggregation or two levels of roll-up, okay? So the first level of roll-up we call slices. So ideally what a slice is trying to do is it's trying to capture a single use case that might span multiple resources. It could be a few related use cases, but the idea is it's a very easy to understand, very easy to say gesture or action or daily routine or task that that is common among your user population. Okay, so examples of slices might be a name might be run the analytics Terraform or modify the build system. That might be the use case. And so in order to identify which systems are necessary to run that use case, what we find is it's often necessary to build what we call a structured name. So that is, for example, here, we might have some sort of a grouping of resources called analytics. We might have an access level called administrative, and we might have a particular geographic region. So you can imagine, because much of this infrastructure is built and maintained in a structured way, you're going to use these parameters to identify which resources might match that filter, okay? And then here you'll also note at the slice level, this is where we also begin to introduce the notion of a particular access level. So you can think of this as an administrative level permission as opposed to a read-only or user level permission. So again, just like sensitivity, where just starting on the sensitivity side with low sensitivity, medium sensitivity, high sensitivity, on the access level, we find it's useful to think about, is this a minimal access case? Is this an unlimited access case or super admin administrative case? Or is this something in between, somehow constrained? Just because you're working in a spreadsheet here, because you're working in human conversation, going further with precision isn't typically very useful, because ideally at this point, you're still shaping the approximate groupings of ultimately roles and slices. And so if you see constrained on the access level, that just becomes a to-do with that particular working group, with the particular owner of that resource, to figure out what the constraints might be in order to, for example, fulfill that use case. Okay. Now that we've got our slices built up, we're going to move on to roles. So the key feature of roles is to strive for making easily understood groupings of access. So this should contain multiple slices, but ideally you want the name to have some sort of intuitive match to some sort of cluster of cases that are just easily understood by your organization. This may coincide with some of your business title and department naming, but generally this is also going to be a bit more flexible. So in the example we've got here, a data scientist might be a marketing data observer as one role, also an analytics model builder as another role. So you can see there, analytics model builder, it doesn't have the word data scientist in it at all. But within your organization, if you asked who builds analytics models, it's very likely that folks would be able to, for example, point to data scientists on the, that are on the data science team. Okay, let's take a look at those roles. So you're going to see here that the way we have modeled roles on this worksheet is to actually allow you to append a role and a slice, and then actually just record essentially why. So you talked to Jeff in this case to determine that the analytics user needed the anonymized user data. Okay. You granted analytics user global to the analytics operator, but then you want to remember that this has to be segregated from some other role because of Sarbanes-Oxley, for example. Okay, so we've talked about the who, we've talked about the what, we've talked about that first level of roll up, the slices. We've talked about that second level of roll up, where slices are merged into groups of slices are merged into roles. And now we're at essentially the final phase of this campaign, keeping in mind that it's most likely that this campaign has taken weeks or months. So you've been building up and enriching this spreadsheet over time. One thing that you've been doing as well, as you've been making progress in this discovery campaign, is you've been using these test cases. You've been using these test cases to try to take a use case that you received from someone in your user population, and you're taking the words that they typed in. So these phrases, these I need access to so that I can, and you're just using your own judgment to attempt to match it to one of these roles, which we're calling your best role. So the idea being that if you over time collect use cases, and if you build up your role definitions and slices, and then you review, in this case, the role, the slices against those roles, you'll ultimately be able to match. If I wanted to ingest raw traffic logs into the data lake, I could do that with the analytics user role. And you would tie that back to the slice. And you'd say, okay, the analytics user role has analytics user anonymized data slice. Analytics anonymized data slice has, this structured name. Yes, it would be able to accomplish that use case. So when you find that if you have 100 test cases, the moment you find you have, a substantial fraction of them, maybe more than 50% of them matched, it could be a sign that you are ready to begin essentially kicking off the implementation phase. And so that's a phase where you would, essentially redigest all of the discovery that you've done, and then begin identifying teams that are ultimately going to need to implement some of these roles. And that's a separate process. But you can see here that anyone in your organization should be able to have a conversation around the spreadsheet, should be able to review a matrix of roles to slices like this, should be able to review a list of use cases, understand that, and hopefully, if you could find major errors upstream here before you kick into implementation, hopefully everyone's going to end up happier ultimately. So that's it. This is the final step of our role discovery campaign spreadsheet.
All right, and that concludes our webinar today. DZone would like to thank Justin for a great presentation. DZone would also like to thank strongDM for providing the audience with a great webinar. And lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career.